All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're going to take a little shortcut right into the heart of the craft beer world. The whole point here is to demystify what's in your glass to make it all less intimidating and way more fun. So let's dive in. You know the feeling, right? You walk into a brewery, you look up at that massive list of beers, and it's just a wall of weird names and descriptions that don't make any sense. It can be totally overwhelming. But here's the thing, you only need to know a few key concepts to navigate that menu like a pro, and maybe find your new favorite drink.
So, first things first. We see that word craft everywhere. But what does it actually mean when it's slapped on a beer label? Well, it turns out there's a real official definition. And it's not just about how the beer tastes. It's about the entire philosophy behind the brewery. Yep, there's actually an organization called the Brewers Association, and they're kind of the guardians of the term. They've laid out 3 very specific rules a brewery has to follow to officially call itself a craft brewer. It all comes down to their size, who owns them, and how they make their beer.
And here they are, small, independent, and traditional. Think of it like a 3-legged stool. If one leg is missing, the whole thing falls over. A brewery has to hit all 3 of these marks to get that craft seal of approval. So let's break them down.
First up is small. This means they have to produce less than 6 million barrels of beer a year. Now, I know that sounds like a ton of beer, right? But in the grand scheme of the global beer industry, it's actually a drop in the bucket. And that smaller size is exactly what gives them the freedom to focus on quality and get creative. Next, independent. This one's a big deal. It means that less than 25% of the brewery can be owned or controlled by a big beverage company that isn't itself a craft brewer. This rule is all about protecting the spirit of the brewery, making sure decisions are driven by a passion for beer, not just corporate profits. And finally, traditional. This is all about the ingredients. It means that the majority of the beer's flavor has to come from, well, traditional brewing ingredients. We're talking malted barley. They can't be watering it down with a bunch of cheap fillers like corn or rice just to cut costs, which is something you see a lot in those mass-produced lagers. Okay, so that's what makes the brewery craft. Now let's talk about the actual beer. Believe it or not, the entire vast, complex world of beer can be pretty much split right down the middle into 2 giant families. Every beer you've ever had, from a Bud Light to a fancy stout, belongs to one of these 2 camps, ale or lager.
And the crazy part? The main difference is all about yeast and temperature. That's it. Ales use a type of yeast that works at warmer temperatures and ferments at the top of the tank. This creates all those complex fruity and spicy flavors. Lagers use a different yeast that prefers colder temps and works at the bottom, resulting in a cleaner, crisper beer where the malt and hops can really take center stage.
So, you've got a beer. It's sitting right there in front of you. How do you even begin to understand what's happening in that glass? Well, I'm going to give you a super simple framework you can use anywhere, anytime. Just remember the 3 C's. And those 3 C's are color, clarity, and consistency. This is your new secret weapon. And look, this isn't about being some kind of beer snob or a certified judge. It's just about using your senses to pick up clues about what you're drinking. The first C, color, is the most obvious clue you get. You can almost taste with your eyes. If you see a light straw-colored beer, you can bet it's going to be pretty light and crisp, like a Pilsner. As it gets darker into those ambers and copper colors, you're probably looking at a pale ale or maybe a bock. And when you see that deep, dark, almost black color, oh yeah, that's a stout. And it's probably going to have some roasty coffee or chocolate flavors. All right, on to our second C, clarity. And let's tackle a big myth right away. We kind of have this idea that a perfectly clear beer is a sign of high quality. So does that mean a hazy beer is a bad beer? The answer is a huge, emphatic no. It really just depends on the style. See, clarity, or the lack of it, is almost always intentional. For a style like a German Pilsner, you absolutely want it to be brilliantly clear. That's part of the package. But for a Hefeweizen, a German wheat beer, it's supposed to be cloudy. It's unfiltered on purpose, and that haze is actually full of yeast and proteins that give it that classic banana and clove flavor. The haze is a good thing. And that brings us to our third and final C,
consistency. Now, this is just another way of talking about mouthfeel. And it has nothing to do with flavor. It's all about the physical sensation, the texture of the beer. Is it thick or thin, prickly and bubbly, or smooth and creamy?
Mouthfeel is really made up of three things. First is the body. Is it full and heavy on your tongue like whole milk, or is it light and thin like water? Then there's carbonation. You know, the fizz, that tingle. And finally, the aftertaste or finish. Does the flavor linger after you swallow, or does it just disappear instantly? That's the difference between a craft lager and a macro lager right there.
So we know how a beer looks and feels in our mouth, but let's get to the main event. Where does all that flavor come from? Well, for the most part, it's a two-person show, starting the twin engines of beer flavor, malt and hops. You really have to think of it as a balancing act. Malt is the backbone. It's the source of the beer's sugar and provides all those sweet, bready, caramel, and roasty chocolate notes. But if it was all malt, it would be way too sweet. That's where hops come in. They provide the bitterness to balance that sweetness. Plus, they give the beer all those amazing aromas, everything from citrus and pine to flowers and herbs. Okay, we've defined craft, we've talked about beer families, and we've learned how to decode a beer with our senses. Now for the fun part, putting it all together so you can walk up to that bar and order with total confidence. Let's run through a super common real-world scenario. You go to a bar, and you know you like Blue Moon. So you ask the bartender, hey, what do you have that's kind of like a Blue Moon? This is a fantastic place to start your exploration. Now, because you've been paying attention, you can have a much better conversation. You know that Blue Moon is a Belgian-style wit beer, a type of wheat beer. So now you have options. You could ask to try another wit beer. Or you could say, I know I like wheat beers, what else is in that family? And they might recommend a German Hefeweizen, or maybe even a spicy, fruity Saison. You've just opened up a whole new world. So, there you have it. You now have the map. You understand the difference between craft and macro, ale and lager, and you have the 3 C's to guide you. You've got the tools to decode any beer menu and discover something amazing. The only real question left is, where are you going to go first? Cheers!